Thanks so much for joining us. We are going to go ahead and get things kicked off this evening. For those of you who I have not met, I am Rayleigh Honeycutt, the Executive Vice President of Montana Stock Growers. Also serve on the Comprehensive Water Review Committee, which is a committee that we'll be talking about quite a bit today. But wanted to also introduce my other fellow panelists. I have Anna Packenham Stevenson. She is the administrator for the Water Resources Division at DNRC, as well as Clayton Elliott, who is with Trout Unlimited, but also has served on the Comprehensive Water Review. This evening, we will be focusing on exempt wells primarily. I know that there's a lot of questions surrounding kind of what's happening with exempt wells in the state as we head towards the legislative session. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Anna to kick off the evening, but also just want to remind folks that if you do have questions throughout the night, you can drop those in the chat and we'll try to answer those as quickly as we see those. So with that, Anna, I'm going to pull up the slides and hand it over to you to kick it off.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. Like Rayleigh said, my name is Anna Packenham Stevenson. It's my pleasure to be here with you guys tonight and to give you information about our stakeholder working group and talk about the stakeholder-driven policy recommendations. As way of background, we wanted to cover, once again, the membership of the stakeholder working group and why we started this effort. As you're all very aware, water is critical for Montana, and the water challenges we face are significant. And so the department, with complete and full support of the the governor's office, formed the stakeholder working group to really bring all the voices to the table of water uses across Montana to really develop policy recommendations to these complex challenges we face across the state. And so today, like Rayleigh said, we're going to be focusing on the exempt well bills, but I want to highlight again all the tremendous amount of time over the last 15 months that these stakeholders have participated in this discussion. As you can see, we've had membership, 3 members from irrigation, 2 members from stock. We had hydropower, industrial, conservation, recreation, and new development, and municipalities participating, as well as attorneys and consultants helping in that conversation. We really aim to find that balanced approach to all the different uses and relatively proportional to the amount of use across the state. So tremendous amount of thanks to all the stakeholders that participated over the last 15 months to develop these policy recommendations for this upcoming legislative session. So if we jump to slide 20, I believe. Great.
So just to kick it off before we dive into the bills, I'll just preface it with this proposal, or these draft proposals that we are presenting tonight are definitely a different way to think about how water and exempt wells are administered and utilized moving into the future. This has been dozens, if not hundreds of hours of time and discussion and negotiations. And I would say for everyone that has been part of the comprehensive water review, it was not 100% consensus. There was give and take from every party. And so we hope that we can, as an organization and as me as a member of the committee, be able to say that we are putting what we feel is a solid draft forward for people to react to that will hopefully protect senior water rights and water right holders, but also provide a path forward for those who need water moving into the future. And so that kind of just sets the stage on the mind frame that we all kind of sat at the table and had as we began to craft these policies. So go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, and I think it's also good to remember that in terms of these bills, they fall into the context of this holistic package that we've already talked about. And so funding for storage is a critical component of meeting our water needs. The mitigation and change process and accessibility of water is critical to meeting our water needs. Incentivizing the use of existing infrastructure, public water and sewer, is critical to meeting our needs. And kind of this is the 4th leg of the 4-legged stool, exempt wells. So there's 2 bills here that Clayton, Rayleigh, and I will go through. I'll tee up the first bill and some of the science around the second bill. So let's go to the next slide. So the 5th bill we'll be discussing is water rights and subdivision coordination. if you're aware of the Horse Creek Hills litigation challenges that happened this year, you'll be aware that there is no certainty in the Platting Act that there is water. So under the current Platting Act, there is not that coordination between county planners or local government and the DNRC who administer water rights. And so there's this gaping hole. There is this false sense of security with the relationship between DEQ and DNRC when you're going through Sanitation Act, because we were doing predetermination letters as a way to aid the DEQ in their process, but they weren't legally enforceable. And so this was creating this false sense that when you received a predetermination letter from the DNRC, and later you filed for the exception at the end of the process, that you were guaranteed this water right. And another challenge we recognize and face and hoping to address this bill is this idea of racing to file for your 602. And so what I mean by 602 is that notice of completion for the exempt well. So today you divide your land, build your house or put in your stock tank, you put the water to beneficial use, and then you file your notice of completion. And at that time, the department will review if you meet the exception or not. And part of that is the review of combined appropriation. There is the possibility that at the end of that, you don't actually know if you meet the exception, and you're kind of left stranded. In addition, as you recall, under the exception to the permit, you are allowed up to 10 acre feet. So say you have a 10 lot subdivision, and each of those houses are building their houses and their homes, they're building and piping, and they're turning on their water, and then they come in to file their 602 or their notice of completion. If the first 8 people file for something greater than, say, 1 acre foot, that they can put to beneficial use, then the last people to file in that subdivision would no longer be eligible under that exception. And that's just the way the law is today. And so that's another thing we were hoping to fix with this bill. So really coordinating between the Subdivision and Platting Act, clarifying roles and responsibilities between DNRC, DEQ, and counties, and providing that certainty for anyone using the exception, whether dividing your land or not, so that you had with the creation of a notice of intent to appropriate at the front end of the process. So you don't have to wait until you've invested in infrastructure, etc., and at the end learn that you qualify for the exception. You can learn that in the beginning. And finally, we're hoping that each lot in that subdivision will have the amount allocated to it under the exception, so there's additional certainty there. So the hope of this bill is, again, addressing some of those acute Horse Creek Hill challenges, providing certainty to all water users that are using the exception, and really coordinating the DNRC and Platting Act processes, and clarifying who's doing sanitation water quality, who's doing water rights legal availability, and who's doing division of land, and really supporting the counties in their Platting Act processes as well. So that's a quick overview of Bill 5. I just want to make sure that Clayton and Rayleigh, you don't want to add anything to that piece.
Nope. Definitely this is DNRC putting forth recommendations to address what the court said were kind of not in alignment with what should be done. So appreciate that. So let's dive into the more interesting topic, which is the exempt well proposal.
Clayton, do you want to start here, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Well, first of all, thanks, Rayleigh, for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to chat and be with you all tonight. I actually had the advantage. I just did this same presentation to another group here in Butte today, so I feel like I am just on a repeat mode. But it's a really big topic, and it's part of why I'm excited to get out and chat with groups and stakeholders around the state about this topic. I think Rayleigh teed it up well. Obviously, going into this process, we all have collectively been working and, quite frankly, fighting over exempt wells for nearly 2 decades now. And I think those of us around the stakeholder group thought that there was a better path forward, and it's one of collaboration and compromise. And I want to be frank, I share Ray Lee's perspective that there was a lot of giving here for those of us who have been concerned about exempt wells, senior water right holders, those of us in the conservation space. And I think that this is a path forward that is also a place that we've made progress on those core issues in terms of protecting senior water rights. Conceptually, at sort of a statewide level, one of the first things that we recognized to getting towards an agreement was that Montana is a very big and unique state, and finding a one-size-fits-all approach was not going to work. The issues, the demands, the supply of water in Ekalaka are very different than they are in the Gallatin Valley or the Flathead Valley. And so we wanted to come up with a framework, a policy framework that was cognizant of and aware of those different demands and challenges within the geography of the state of Montana. Second piece that we wanted to make sure, in addition to being nuanced by geography, we wanted to make sure it was grounded in both scientific and legal criteria. And when we worked through that sort of two parameters, where we came to was an approach that treated different areas based on the pressures and demands differently. And that's the tiering of red, yellow, and green. And I'm going to start just briefly laying these out and turn it over to Anna to talk more about the science around how you get into these areas. First of all, in the green areas, I think that we recognize that most of the state is not dealing with the unique challenges that our highly developing urbanizing areas are. And so to the extent possible, we wanted to make sure that we're protecting status quo in those areas. And to do that we needed to divide it into sort of two categories. One was a set of categories where or a set of circumstances where people are subdividing land and using the Subdivision and Plating Act to create new subdivisions, even in these green areas. And that was an area of concern based on some of the legal framework that was established in Horse Creek Hills. At the same time, protecting that status quo. So we'll dig more into what that means, but as in the green statewide areas, two pathways. There were also areas that were beginning to be an area of concern. And so that's sort of the yellow areas where we're keeping green restrictions, but adding some additional monitoring and measurement. And then in the really challenging areas where we have high levels of development, higher pressures being put on the resource, utilizing the existing framework of controlled groundwater areas. Again, we're going to talk about what all these mean, but this is the framework, recognizing the state is a diverse place. The challenges are unique across the state. Utilizing to the extent possible existing statutory frameworks like controlled groundwater area, the concept of controlled groundwater areas. And then the sort of final parameter that helped guide our negotiation was we wanted to provide certainty to water users. We wanted to protect senior water rights while allowing for development. We wanted something that could be legally defensible and that we could hand to the department and they could implement in a meaningful way. And we weren't burdening the department with unworkable law that would not be able to be implemented on the ground. Anything to add?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so let's wade into the science and legal frameworks that were really the foundation for the decisions of the stakeholder working group. Like Clayton said, we really wanted to use science-based criteria in our legal frameworks, the laws that we have to abide by, to really start differentiating sites across the state. And so early on in the process, the NRC collected a lot of data into one place about kind of the status of exempt wells, the concentrations, what they look like across the landscape, and the status of kind of our understanding of water availability too. So as you can see from this map, these are the administrative basins, and you can see that there are 6 areas highlighted: the Flathead, Missoula, Bitterroot, Helena, Gallatin, and Billings. So first we looked at where were the highest concentration of exempt wells across the state. And the reason why we wanted to identify that is there is the potential for them to have a cumulative impact either on the aquifer itself or the hydrologically connected surface water. We also looked at areas that lacked surface water legal availability because these areas would be over appropriated. We wanted to look also to verify that there was a hydrologic connection between the groundwater, the aquifer itself, and the surface water above it, meaning that if you put a straw in the groundwater, there would be an effect to that surface water above. And we generally think of these as alluvial aquifers. And then finally, where new groundwater permitting is requiring mitigation. So the department put together these data to really lay the foundation for how the group was going to make policy decisions. Next slide, please.
Oops, sorry.
Okay.
There we go.
So like Clayton and Rayleigh mentioned, we then partitioned these science-based and legal criteria to the different designations: green, yellow, and red. So red is, we know we have a problem. Yellow, we need to learn more. And green, statewide. So let me dive a little bit into these recommendations. Oh, previous slide. Great. So as we think about the designation, there are three distinct criteria. The groundwater physical availability itself. So what does the aquifer look like itself? Is there enough water? We collaborated with MBMG on this analysis because they do a tremendous amount of groundwater work across the state. And with this, we have criteria both for the red and yellow. So I'm talking about criteria 1, the red areas, and then the yellow areas below. And so you can see the groundwater level trends. And so for red, for an example, the groundwater level trend is declining or expected to the extent that water right holders can't exercise their water right, or the legal demand of groundwater exceeds the 80% of physical availability. So these two criteria were ones that DNRC and MBMG look at and review. So those would be a reason why you would make it a red area. The next is criteria 2. So let's look at the red one. This is groundwater connected to surface water and looking at the legal availability of that surface water. And so what do I mean by that? The physical availability is, what is the water either below ground or above ground that is physically there? Is it running by your house? The legal availability is, how many water rights have been given to account for that physical availability. So the legal availability is, say there's 10 units of physical availability. Have we given out 10 units of water rights? That's your legal availability. So when the legal demand or the water rights of that surface water are exceeding the physical availability for any given month. So when they're exceeding that, or it's over appropriated, this would be the second criteria by which a closure would occur. The third criteria, and again in red, is related to water quality. We all know that water quality and quantity are connected. In an existing statute today for groundwater areas, there are water quality criteria as well. So we had the opportunity to work with DEQ and the stakeholder working group to further refine those water quality criteria in terms of septic density and surface water impairments. So again, you'll see in the red, there's 3 criteria: the physical availability of groundwater, the surface water that is connected to, and that legal availability, and the water quality. And in the monitoring areas, you'll see those similar criteria, but you're seeing more trends or needs to look further at it so that we can study and learn more. Next slide, please. What is unique about this bill is that the bill draft today says the department shall designate these groundwater areas. So there are 4: Gallatin, Helena, Bitterroot, and Missoula as red. And in the monitoring areas, the department shall designate these temporary groundwater areas: Flathead Valley and Billings. What's also in the bill is that scientific criteria that you saw on the previous slide. We're maintaining the petition process that when these criteria are met, the public can petition the department for this designation as well. So not only does the bill designate these 6 geographic regions, but provides a process that if conditions on the ground change in the future, that the public and the department can have future designations of these red, yellow, and green areas. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Clayton or Relay to kind of go back into the policy and then tie into what does the red area look like.
Go ahead, Clayton. You can kick it off and I'll jump in.
Great. Well, I'm gonna, since last time I started with the green areas, I'm gonna flip that and start with the red areas. So using the science-based criteria to try to better understand where we were having constraints both on physical and legal availability. And I mentioned the utilization of a policy framework that exists in statute already today of controlled groundwater areas in these red areas where the sort of science and legal criteria establish that we do have a problem, that we are greatly, or that we are exceeding the sort of capacity of the aquifer from a physical and legal availability standpoint. We wanted to take an aggressive approach to close those areas to new exempt well development. That in these areas, the provision that the department shall designate a controlled groundwater area, or utilizing that framework. We've tweaked it a little around the edges, but no new exempt wells in these red areas. These are the problematic areas where we have constraints on physical and legal availability demonstrated by science. Obviously, there are some constraints within that, and wanted to make sure that we provided some flexibility in the outlying cases where you don't have an ability to access water through tying into public water and sewer, for example, or mitigation is not available for a new water right. And in the instances within these red areas that there may be stock water needs. So there is one small pressure relief valve from the new exempt well policy approach in red areas to allow for stock water or sort of exigent circumstances related to a single family home. Also in these red areas, the other significant piece is, and to me, a major step forward in water policy is requiring metering and reporting for all new uses in these red areas to better understand how our new uses are contributing to or exacerbating any problems around physical and legal availability. In the yellow
Yeah, and I
area,
just
yeah, go for it.
I would jump in and say I think the Comprehensive Water Review Working Group talked a lot about enforcement and the need to be able to enforce how people may be using or not using water in different ways. However, we don't have a lot of scientific data around monitoring and reporting. So while this is probably not as far as some people want us to go as it relates to enforcement in this bill proposal, we are taking that big step to dedicate and put into statute monitoring and reporting for new uses so that we can step into a larger enforcement discussion once we have those things in place.
Yes, I think that, thank you for highlighting that, Rayleigh. And I also saw Hertha's question in the chat about how we're protecting senior water rights. And to me, the red areas are really the central area where we are intentionally making a policy, because these are areas where the scientific and legal criteria suggests that we are already having a negative detrimental impact to senior water rights, that we're not going to further exacerbate that problem by closing those red areas to new exempt wells. Transitioning to the yellow areas, these were the areas where the sort of scientific and legal criteria suggest that we're either sort of on the way to getting to a problem or we're very close to being to a red area. And the piece here in these yellow areas is primarily dedicating additional resources to the monitoring, sort of long-term trend lines, and how close we are coming to the meeting those criteria for a red area. And part of that, both in terms of the monitoring and modeling and additional scientific data that the department and MBM, the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology, can leverage in these yellow areas, is also additionally requiring metering and reporting for all new uses so we can understand the trend lines of where we're headed. The goal obviously is to better understand these yellow areas, to understand if they need to be moved into a controlled groundwater area or red area designation or not.
Clayton, before you move on to green,
Yep.
Hertha had a question, and I'll just read it and either one of us can answer. Where is the certainty that the amount of groundwater that the legislation would allow for subdivisions is actually physically available? I'm assuming, Hertha, you're talking about the green and yellow areas. Yes? I'm assuming. I guess I would start with
Yes.
the things. The criteria really help us get at that question. So again, kind of taking that zoom out, looking for those areas where we have high concentrations of exempt wells, where there is that cumulative impact problem. And then taking those criteria and having those assessments either through the monitoring areas or or the yeah, thank you. So when these criteria are met, the department will initiate these studies, and then when they're exceeded, we have the ability to then create controlled groundwater areas where we've never had that ability before. So I think it provides a really strong framework, and we've kind of identified the largest problematic areas across the state, and putting them into motion either for studying or closure. And then as more areas come online, potentially with population growth in other areas, we have a mechanism now by which we can work with the Bureaus of Mines and Geology and the USGS to identify the groundwater physical availability and those legal availability challenges of both groundwater and surface water. So the mechanism is the science-based criteria by which we can designate these areas in the future.
Yeah, and I would add to that component too. I mean, it gives the department the tools that they need to be able to move problematic areas with the science and legal criteria into red and yellow designations. But the other thing I would highlight here is that if the department was not moving forward, it preserves the opportunity for water users to petition the department to review the criteria and designate either red or yellow. And that sort of petition process is taken from the controlled groundwater area statute and applied to these aquifer closures as well for groundwater quantity. So twofold. One, we're giving finally the tools and teeth that the department needs to move actively into closure areas because of the criteria. And second, we're preserving the opportunity for concerned water users to find remedy through this aquifer closure as well, and to petition the department based on the criteria.
And a slight nuance, and absolutely what Clayton just said, the difference is really between may and shall, right?
Yep.
Today we may, and that also means we may not. And the criteria that are put forth here by petition or by the department, it's a shall.
Correct. And that was a big line in the sand for those of us who were concerned about protecting senior water rights, was the sort of existing controlled groundwater area statute. I'm not saying by the current DNRC, but those of us who've been around for a long time had watched the DNRC in the past sort of turn a blind eye to the statute because of that may language. And so for us in that negotiation, it was important to have the word shall, that the department shall do these. Last amongst the three, sort of moving from red, yellow now to green. Again, the green was the sort of statewide parameter. So these are the areas where most closely relate to the sort of vision of the framers and drafters of the Montana Water Use Act, who imagined an exemption statute that would truly be de minimis, where sort of small volumes of water, whether it be for a rancher who has a sort of back 40 section that has the need to have stock water, or building an isolated cabin or a single family ranch house, those sort of very truly de minimis uses, we wanted to preserve the integrity of sort of status quo in those cases. So if you are needing in the green areas outside of these sort of problematic areas where the physical and legal availability criteria are being met, everywhere else, making sure that normal water or everyday water users have the opportunity to continue status quo if those needs are truly de minimis. But acknowledging in those green areas that even though we don't have the criteria being met, that there is challenges around the use of combined appropriation. And I think those challenges are sort of unique to multiple types of water users. From my concern, it was truly, in my mind, and this is a personal opinion, the exemptions in the Water Use Act were never meant to be a tool for subdivision development. And I've had sort of a longstanding concern about using the exemptions to provide water for large scale subdivision development. So one of the things that we wanted to carve out in that green area was, one, if you're sort of that truly de minimis traditional sort of use of the exemption, we wanted to preserve the integrity of status quo. But at the same time, we wanted to make sure that there was some additional scrutiny from my perspective and constraints around subdivision development. And that's the second pathway that we've created in this green area, that if you are subdividing land, you go into a second pathway. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that second pathway looks like in a second. But just to flag that in these green areas, there are two pathways. One with the true intent to preserve status quo for those truly de minimis traditional uses of the exemption. And two, to provide additional sideboards from my perspective, around subdivision development in those green areas. The part of that also was metering and reporting requirement for all subdivisions in that second pathway. So if you're in pathway one, the sort of traditional use, status quo stays and there's no metering and reporting there. But if you are going through the Subdivision and Plating Act and using the exemption as a water supply strategy, you would be required to meter and report those uses.
So I would say before we head to the next slide that this is definitely a different way to look at how exempt wells are done with these two pathways. I would say many people within the working group have advocated for many years not to create pathways or different uses or policies like that. But I think we also need to recognize, as we're part of the conversation, that the use of exempt wells by development, that ship has sailed. That's happening. And so from my seat in the conversations, my goal was to make sure that if development was utilizing exempt wells, we were protecting senior water rights and also creating parameters and very clear regulations around how they're using it so that we do have that certainty and it's not somewhat of the Wild West or ways that people can find loopholes to take advantage of the exempt well component. So with that, Clayton, I will hand that back over to you.
Yes, well, thank you. That's the tee up to the green pathways here. So there are two pathways in green. This is taking that green area, the statewide application, and digging a little bit deeper on this slide. So again, as I stated, pathway one, you are not going through any division of land through the Subdivision and Plating Act. We want to preserve the status quo, which includes an analysis of combined appropriation, basically the sort of concept that you can drill multiple wells, but based on a set of criteria and factors that those are considered combined and subject to one overall limit on volume. So the one change that makes this a little bit different, it doesn't really, but in my opinion, it does not change the application of the statute in this pathway one, but provides greater clarity both for the department in implementing the law, as well as water users who are subject to the review of combined appropriation, as it puts in statute the criteria or the factors in which the department can use to consider whether or not two or more wells are considered combined in their appropriation. And you'll see those here in bold. These are the criteria and factors that the department has been using and would continue to use. But from a water user standpoint, we felt more comfortable with those being in statute. So we have clear understanding of what factors are being used to review for combined appropriation. Again, this is status quo for green areas where you're not dividing lands. The scenarios being, needing to drill a well for stock water on a section needing to provide water for a cabin, single family home, a ranch house outside of an urban areas. That's pathway one. Second pathway. This is the pathway in the green areas for when you are using the Subdivision and Platting Act to divide land. So those are parcels. The Subdivision and Platting Act applies to all parcels under 160 acres. The trigger for when you go down pathway 2 is that you divide your parcel in some way under the Subdivision and Platting Act. Couple pieces here. I'm going to start with sort of the lot cap, because that's, to me, how this triggers in my mind. In your division, for the sort of allocation of water, you're limited to 24 lots or less. So you can divide your original parcel of 160 acres or into no more than, or 24 lots or less. Each one of those individual lots is allocated 0.5 acre feet per acre and no more than 1 acre foot per lot. If you are dividing that original parcel into 25 lots or more, you need to go get a permit or find a water right, do a change, whatever. You have to go get a water right. I wanted to pause just quickly in case there are people who want to add in here before I get into snapshot and grandfathering. So
No, go ahead, and then we have some questions too.
Great. So you have an original parcel, you divide it in 24 lots or less. Each one of those lots is allocated up to 1 acre foot maximum per lot. To me, this is an important change from sort of some previous iterations of bills that I had seen in prior years that would prohibit the sort of pooling of water into one source, sort of one pot of water that you're utilizing then to do for purposes that really aren't congruent with what the intent of the statute of the exemption is. A couple parameters here to just cover quickly before we get to questions. The snapshot. So what does the department consider your original parcel size? So when you go through the Subdivision and Platting Act, now the department looks at your parcel, how many lots you're going to create. The size of the parcel that you are dividing on 10/17/2014 is the snapshot in time, which is what the original parcel size is set as. Second, also in this area, I didn't touch on this as much in the red areas. There certainly was an element of trying to be cognizant of people who had a reasonable expectation of what they were already allocated. They were in the middle of a process. Obviously, the law is going to change in the middle of the process. We wanted to make sure that if you have papers in hand that say you're predetermination letter, a COSA, the paper in hand that says you're building a house and you have 1.2 acre feet of water, whatever that may be, that predetermination letter, that is sort of honored. We want to honor that existing expectation that you have from an official piece of paper from the government. So those are sort of what we consider in the grandfathering. And again, just to highlight, if you are in pathway 2, if you're using the Subdivision and Platting Act to divide land and access water under this pathway 2, you're going to be required to meter and report your water.
So just a couple additional points here before we jump into questions. One, the snapshot. There was a lot of discussion and debate about what that snapshot should be. Should it be when the bill is passed? Should it be a future date? Or should it be a date that already is kind of used in water policy? And so the group did land on this 10/17/14 date because that is already in a date that's used in processes when it comes to water. And so rather than having multiple different points in time that you need to determine if or when you need to reference to, the group felt that that date was kind of, to help with consistency, the best date to go off of. In addition to what Clayton said, I would also just hit on volume cap, because we did have a lot of conversations about this is not automatic. There's still a need to put it to beneficial use and the importance of that. And so always just keep in mind that this is up to numbers, and the beneficial use component is always number one as those decisions and determinations are happening.
I want to put a
Okay,
little.
so
Can I
yeah,
put a little more
go ahead,
meat
Anna.
on the bone on the up to piece? This is a common misconception that we've been working through a lot, both in the working group, but as we've been giving these talks. There's a thought that you just get 10 acre feet or you just get 1 acre foot. As with all uses of the exception, you do have to demonstrate, like Ray Lee said, that it is being put to a beneficial use. So if you are not able to beneficially use that amount of the volume cap, you will not be allocated that water. So I want to add a little more clarity there. And then Ray Lee or Clayton, I think going to the next slide and giving a visual of this might help clarify too before we hit questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
Do you want me to describe this or Clayton?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is your new graphic, Anna, so
let's
Sure,
see how this one
explain it.
goes. Okay, so we created this to try to help understand. Okay, so you see the 2013 date on the left. So this is what your parcel looked like prior to 2014, 10/17/2014. Like Ray Lee said, this is a date the department is currently using in terms of our tracking and use of exempt wells because of the Clark Fork Coalition date. Okay, so say on 2015, you've divided your land and you got a COSA and a predetermination letter on those 2 lots. So the top left lots. And that's what it looks like in 2015. In 2025, the bill passes. So in 2025, that is kind of the trigger. There's now 2 pass, the bill passes. If you are not dividing your land, it is totally status quo from today in terms of what will it look like. Your COSA and predetermination letter will be honored, but the other lots will be reviewed for combined appropriation and they will receive up to 10 acre feet based on that analysis and what water you're putting to beneficial use. If you're dividing your land, so the bill passes, you decide to divide your land, the trigger is met. Now you have those sideboards. And for some reason, I can't see my own screen. Okay, so again, we will honor the COSA and the predetermination letters in those top 2. We're gonna go back to when that snapshot took place. So go back to the 2013. You had the greens, the blue, and the pink. So in the pink, and you're now dividing that land. See the yellow line? In that division of land, you have up to 0.5 acre feet per acre, no more than 1 acre foot per lot for those 2 pink ones because they were divided. And going back to that original snapshot, that blue one was already there in place on 2013. That will be reviewed for combined appropriation. So the kind of 2 important pieces here. What does the original parcel look like? Look at the 2013 area. You had 1, 2, 3 parcels. 2, we are honoring, no matter what pathway you're going down, that COSA and predetermination letter. 3, the bill passes once you divide your land. See on the bottom right, now you have those sideboards on the amount of water and the volume and the total number of lots you're allowed to use.
All right, so let's hit some questions. First question is, 1 acre foot is a lot of water. How did you decide 1 acre foot, and why does a lot need that much water?
Yeah, I'm happy to tackle that first, and certainly feel free to jump in. I mean, Hertha, quite frankly, this was a negotiation, and we started from the place of sort of understanding what current law is, and in those subdivision, I mean, there's certainly a scenario where every one of those lots could be eligible for up to 10 acre feet. I had a sort of strong conviction that in those lots, you should be limited to a single family home, which was 0.28 acre feet or basically 0.3 acre feet. the development community felt like there should be some ability to have a sort of small lawn or garden, which I thought was a reasonable ask. So for me, where I think 1 acre foot is doable, it certainly is going to preclude you from having a large, 2 acre lawn, or to put an orchard on it, or to like have a tremendously expansive garden. You're going to be fairly limited. You're going to have to go out if you want to have those things, a large expansive yard or garden or whatever. You're probably going to be hitting right up to the 1 acre foot and exceeding it. And you're going to have to go out and find water, whether that's buying a share in an irrigation, a ditch company, or wherever, new permit, finding existing right, changing that right, whatever. You're going to have to go get more water. But for 1 acre foot, it was a reasonable expectation that that would be enough for a home and a small yard. So again, to answer that question, it was a negotiation. I think that, and today, I have some people in the development community who are screaming bloody murder that how can I ever do enough on 1 acre foot of water? And we need up to 10 acre feet for each lot, particularly if the lots are getting bigger in size. And I have heard from some folks that 1 acre foot is too much, but I can speak for myself, and feeling comfortable with this was a negotiated compromise that won. The important part of, I do want to highlight there that the difference in this approach versus, let's just take the bill that dealt with exempt wells last session, was it never allocated or sort of tied that cap per lot. So in 640, House Bill 642 last session, one of our concerns collectively was that you could take all of the water allocated under these exemptions, put them into one giant cistern, and irrigate, quite frankly, an alfalfa field with it. So one of the important pieces for me in that negotiation was to try to tie a smaller allocation of water into an individual lot that then could not be transferred to other lots, and protect against the sort of pooling of exemptions into one mega exemption. So that's how we got there. I'm not going to be glib. It was a compromise.
I would say that the number of parcels, that 24 number, was also a compromise. I think there are folks that would like that number to be smaller, and just very transparently, development wanted more. And so we got to a number that I think people could live with. Is it perfect? No, but I think it could have been a lot worse in some cases. And that's kind of a candid way to say it, but the development community definitely wanted way more lots than 24. Okay, another question. Does this proposed legislation? Oh, go ahead, Clayton.
No, I was just going to say
Rayleigh.
quickly, I mean, if it was up to Rayleigh and I think you would have seen a bill that had significantly less lots, and you would have seen a significantly smaller volume. Both of us share a sort of belief that that's where we would like to go. We also understood that we were trying to find a compromise, and that's where we're at.
Rayleigh and Clayton, I think if you go to the next slide, another, I think, piece of the compromise discussion was also, how does this relate to today?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's an important piece of the conversation too. So if Rayleigh, do you want me to go over this quickly?
Sure. Yep.
So in today's universe, post Host Creek Hills, we review for combined appropriation. That's in the blue. So in the acreage is on the far left. Today, in our review of combined appropriations, a 30 acre would be 10 to 20, a 48 acre would be 10 to 20, 160 acre would be 10 to 20 plus, probably a lot more. If you can look at now to the right under orange, the 2-path options, not dividing your land is exactly what today looks like, but dividing your land on a 30 acre is kind of like that certainty of 15, but it is less than what is potentially available today under not changing the bill. 40 is 20, that certainty there, and is in the range. And then you see that difference around 48 acres. It's slightly more. but in 160 it could be significantly less. So there is that variability from today, but I think the conversation was around if we're going to couple green, yellow, and red, let's try to keep it around today, but also get those mechanisms around monitoring enclosures that are not available today.
Okay, so next question. Does this proposed legislation address large municipal wells such as the Judith Gap Mussel Shell Water Project, or are they covered under different statutes?
Different statutes would be my guess. I don't know the specific scenario or circumstances around those, but if there are large municipal wells, I'm guessing that they are permitted well.
Excellent. Okay.
That's
Next question is,
Yep.
Is pathway 2 only for those who are planning to subdivide as of 10/17/2024, or sorry, 2014? Or am I correct that new subdivisions can use path 2?
Anna, do you want to tackle that?
Yep.
I'm breaking up. Can you say it again?
The question is that can new subdivisions use path 2, or is it only tied to those from 10/17/2014?
That's a great question. So in the flow chart, if you recall, the trigger is to go down path 2. After the bill passes, you're subdividing your land, you go down path 2. It's pretty simple. Now, the original parcel, or how many lots do you get, is based on everything that has been subdivided since 10/17/2014. So what I mean by that is if you've divided, and you've divided it to 22 lots, you can divide it again. 23 and 24, you're still under this bill. After you've exceeded that 24 lot, any more divisions of land, you can still divide your land. You must now go get a permit for those or get water through a change.
Yes, just to be clear, the 10/17/2014 is only a snapshot in time to determine the original parcel size of where the sort of 24, the count to 24 begins is based on that original parcel size. That's the importance of that date.
Okay, another question. What happens in the green and yellow if there actually isn't enough water? The subdivisions are built, many people depend on the water, and now senior water rights cannot use their water because the water rights have been sucked up by the subdivisions. Is there a robust cumulative impact analysis?
Anna, do you want to address the cumulative impact analysis component? I mean, I can address part where I think that we are making progress. Hertha, I hear your concern and I share your concern, quite frankly. Part of where I believe we make progress in this bill around those yellow and green areas and subdivisions particularly is finally, for the first time, requiring metering and reporting. So in the green areas, all subdivisions are going to have to meter and report their water usage. And in those yellow areas, all new water uses, subdivisions included, are going to have to meter and report their usage. So that is significant progress in my mind, and that applies to those subdivisions in either yellow or green. And that's a step forward. I will turn it over to Anna to talk about the cumulative impact component.
Guys, I don't know if you can hear me. My camera. Okay, great. Clayton, I'm not sure exactly what you said, but in terms of cumulative impacts, as you're aware,
And I think we lost you, and I know she's driving back from Great Falls, so has a little bit spotty service. I do think it's important. Hopefully, Anna will get back on because the department's perspective on the cumulative impact analysis and what is already allowed in statute, I think, is important. Part of that in the sort of limited context in my mind is that's the essence of combined appropriation as well. to try to understand. But for me, in those green and yellow areas, we're finally going to be able to get our handle on the volume of water being used in subdivisions, and that's a big step forward in my mind.
Anna, can you hear us? Okay,
Yeah,
let's
I
talk
hope
to
you can
this.
hear me.
Okay. Yep, go ahead. Cumulative impact.
Can you hear me, guys? I'm so sorry.
Yep,
Yeah,
we can
I'm
hear
sorry.
you.
I've been sitting in the same spot somehow. I can't connect. Okay, so in terms of cumulative impacts, current statute and current exempt well statute does not have that cumulative impact assessment. And so there is that limitation. I wasn't able to hear what Ray Lee or Clayton said, Hertha, in terms of the response, but what this bill does do and the data and information that has been brought to the table is we can start to identify where there is the potential for cumulative impacts and identify those as monitoring areas. And then with the metering reporting data on red, yellow, and in particular green, where we're seeing people subdivide in that process, we're now able to meter and report there. And so we're now able, in ways that we haven't been able to before, began to collect those data on that use, and then being able to use that proactively, and that shall designate for monitoring in the red areas in ways that we haven't before. It is not perfect. I'll certainly admit that, but I do think it's a step in the right direction in giving us the tools we need in order to assess these areas and make policy changes.
All right, next question. In today's system, without an exemption, can't I object to a subdivision getting a water right if I am concerned about adverse impact? Isn't it true that under this bill, I cannot object?
Yeah, I can tackle that, Hertha. I think that's a great question, and at the heart of a lot of the discussion amongst the stakeholder work group, and particularly those of us who work in this space. So if that, in today's world, the scenario you set up in the first half of the question, in today's world, if there's a subdivision who is not using the exemption, that is that they are going through the new permit process or a change, finding an existing water right and changing that process, you are right. There's an opportunity for you to object. Most, not all, but most subdivisions are already currently using an exemption. So in today's law, if they are using an exemption, which is a lot of, if not most subdivision processes, you have no right to object. That does not change under this bill. Nor does in my mind, the good actors who are choosing to go through a new permit or change process, you will still have the right to object to that subdivision. The distinction really isn't about this bill. It is about whether or not that developer is using the new permit or change process or using the exemption. Unfortunately, under the exemption, there has never been the ability to object, and that is true today, and it is true under this bill moving forward.
All right, that looks like we hit all of our questions. If I missed something, please drop us a reminder. But let's kind of head to just maybe a recap of where we are as it relates to heading into legislative session. And definitely, we are actively having conversations still about this exempt well bill. We had one Friday, we had another one this week. And so the bill draft is not public yet in its latest version, but we will try to get that posted on the website and out to people as soon as it is. So if you haven't participated in our other two webinars, I would encourage you to go back and do that. We'll send out kind of a recap with all the links to all of the webinars. But really, in this 3-series webinar, we did hit on 6 different bills that are coming to the legislature, a couple under what we are calling final decree transition, a couple under storage, mitigation, and public water systems, and then these 2 exempt wells that we hit on tonight. So there is a lot of content and a lot of proposed bill drafts kind of in the works right now. We and I would personally welcome all of your feedback, questions, comments, concerns on any of these. As we've shared, this has been, almost a 2-year process, and there's been a lot of conversations and a lot of going back and a lot of negotiations. And so we know that we probably missed some things or topics or, numbers or whatever it may be. And so I would encourage you to feel free to reach out to all 3 of us with those ideas or thoughts or concerns, because we still have time to make adjustments before we head into the legislative session. So Clayton and Anna, I'll kind of hand it over to you for some final thoughts, and then we'll wrap it up for the evening.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first, and just thank you again to Montana Stock Growers. Thank you, Rayleigh. It's a great pleasure and privilege to get to work in partnership with Montana Stock Growers, and thank you for sharing Rayleigh's time in this process to get to hopefully, and I believe, move the ball forward on very difficult and controversial issues. I think in the context of Rayleigh talking about this as a package across these 6 bills, I think there are places that both Rayleigh and I would have done things differently if it was just up to us. But there's also a lot of things that I think are significant wins for our individual organizations. So as a package, and I really have to view it as such, this is a true compromise. There's some give and some get, and I think collectively as water users, we are collectively making a significant step forward with this package. But it is a compromise. The other thing that I would just highlight, and I know the first conversation webinar that we did was around water storage, and some exciting developments that happened last week with the release of Governor Gianforte's budget and tremendous sort of generational investment in water storage, thanks to the governor and his leadership for recognizing the value of water storage as a bridge for many paths forward across this package. So there's more information to come as we sort of digest the budget, but a transformational level of investment, both on existing water storage and new water storage development in this Montana Water Development Fund. So appreciate the leadership of Governor Gianforte and moving forward and listening to us as water users here.
Final thoughts, Anna.
Rayleigh, just want to similarly thank you and the stock growers for this opportunity. And I just want to actually give a huge amount of thanks for the stakeholders that participated in this process. It has been a deep honor to help facilitate this and bring people together for this critical conversation. I think we're at a critical time in water, and I'm proud of the conversations that you all have had, the relationships forged. There are compromises here, but it has been a tremendous opportunity to have people come together and try to hash out meaningful solutions for us in Montana around these water challenges. So very much looking forward to input on these bills. The conversation will continue. This 3 series is excellent. We have the stakeholder working group in the department will be putting on another 3 series to complement this one and just to dive further. So more to come here on conversations around these bill topics.
Excellent. All right. Well, we have spent an hour with you this evening. We really appreciate you spending time with us, and hopefully this gives you at least a baseline understanding of these really complex water issues and bill drafts that have been in the works and are still continue to be refined as we head into the legislative session. In addition to tonight, we'll again share all of the webinars that we've done, but Anna will be at our annual convention in 2 weeks in Billings, and we'll be giving kind of a next level update as well. It will be short, and that's why we did these webinars, and so we could kind of have long form a series. But Anna will be there, so if you have questions after you kind of think through all of this in the next couple of days, be sure to grab her. And again, we are all available to answer questions at any time. So thank you again for joining us this evening, and we look forward to continuing having water discussions so that we can have a meaningful and strategic path forward for water users across the state. So thanks again this evening, and we will hopefully see many of you in Billings for our annual convention December 4th through the 6th. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks.